Hey guys, I'm back again to continue with Lincoln's grave robbers. When we left off yesterday, Benjamin Boyd's wife was let go, found not guilty of anything, but Benjamin was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And Tyrell, the police or the Secret Service agent that captured him, got a promotion. And he is proud of himself, but it is a bigger workload. And he says that he never guessed how Benjamin Boyd's friends were going to try to get him out of prison. Okay, Chapter 4, Big Jim. 300 miles to the southwest in St. Louis, Missouri, a livery stable owner named James Keneley followed the news from Chicago with increasing alarm. He had good reason to be worried. The arrest and conviction of Ben Boyd threatened to bring his entire empire crashing down. Keneley was 37 years old in 1876. Thanks to descriptions in his prison records, we know he was just under 6 feet tall, with a fair complexion and light gray eyes. He'd done time in prison for horse theft, and 2 long stints in the Illinois State Penitentiary for passing counterfeit cash. All that time behind bars taught Keneley some valuable lessons. Valuable, that is, to a man determined to continue a life of crime. Keneley settled in St. Louis and opened a livery stable with a bit of help from an old friend, none other than Ben Boyd's brother-in-law, Pete McCartney. And here is the prison, the Illinois State Penitentiary that Boyd was sent to. But Keneley and his investor had no intention of eking out a living by renting horses. The stable was really just a front, making it appear to the world that these men were legitimate businessmen. In fact, behind the scenes, Keneley set up and managed one of the biggest counterfeiting networks in the Midwest. That's when people started calling him Big Jim. Big Jim had one strict rule. He never touched the stuff himself. Rather than handling piles of potentially incriminating coney, he accepted orders from counterfeiting gangs around the region. Keneley would then contact an engraver and printer, paying them to produce the needed product. When the coney was ready, he'd have the printer hide the stash in some predetermined spot, in a hollow log out in the country or in a hole under a roadside rock. The client would be told to pick up this order and to leave his payment. Of course, Keneley only accepted payments in real U.S. currency. It was all wildly profitable, but the entire operation was based on one simple fact. Keneley produced the best, most realistic-looking coney available, and he was able to do this for one simple reason. He hired the best engraver, Ben Boyd. Boyd's arrest knocked Keneley's system out of joint, and the supply of quality coney circulating in Midwestern cities began to fall. Bank tellers were among the first to notice. Specially trained to detect counterfeit bills, they were used to spotting about 1 bogus bill an hour. Now, in the early months of 1876, they might see 1 a month. New tellers were actually upset by the change. As one banker explained, younger men in the bank complained that there was not enough counterfeit money in circulation for them to learn how to detect it. For young tellers, this was an inconvenience. For Big Jim, it was a catastrophe. He continued taking orders and producing coney, but everything was harder without Ben Boyd. Other engravers just weren't as talented or meticulous. Fake bills printed from their plates were easier to detect, so they had a shorter life expectancy. For example, say Keneley sold his clients a new batch of $10 bills. Once the police spotted one of these fake 10s, they distribute descriptions of the bogus bill to business owners and newspapers. That made all the bills in the entire batch just about worthless. Besides, trying to pass inferior coney was a lot riskier than passing top-notch stuff. Shovers were much more likely to get caught in the act. Naturally, Keneley's clients were not about to pay top dollar for lower quality, riskier merchandise. They demanded steep discounts, and Big Jim had no choice but to agree. His business was falling apart. The men who made their living mainly by means of Boyd's work have been down in the mouth ever since this arrest, declared the Chicago Tribune. They had used every means in their power to get him out. The Tribune reporter heard that Boyd's friends had tried to bribe court officials and prison guards, with no luck. Money could not obtain a pardon, the paper explained. Keneley was getting desperate. In early March, he got on a train and rode to Lincoln, Illinois, a town named for the country's 16th president. There, he met with members of the Logan County gang, regular customers of his. In flush times, the gang liked to brag that, thanks to them, there was more bogus than real money floating around Logan County. But business was slow now. The men were eager for any kind of work. And it just so happened that Big Jim had a job for them. He wanted them to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln. Incredibly, Big Jim wasn't the first person to think of stealing a dead president. That's odd. On a foggy night back in 1830, a young Gardner snuck out onto the grounds of Mount Vernon, George Washington's Virginia estate. Washington had died in 1799, but the property still belonged to his family. Until a few days before, the gardener had worked at Mount Vernon, but he'd been fired for some unknown reason. Apparently, he was pretty upset about the dismissal. The man felt his way between trees along the soggy ground, sloping down from the family house to the banks of the Potomac River. Ahead, he saw a small stone building, exactly what he'd come for, George Washington's burial vault. The gardener pushed through the unlocked door and stood inside. Fog and faint moonlight slanted in through the crumbling stone walls. Looking around, the man saw 20 coffins. A few lay across wooden beams. Others were just stacked on top of each other. The purpose of the vault was to keep the bodies of Washington and his extended family above the often flooding waters of the Potomac. But the vault's intense heat and humidity were causing the wooden coffins to rot and collapse. Several bones had already fallen to the muddy floor. Only the bodies of George and Martha Washington were well protected inside coffins of lead, lying side by side on a wooden table in the corner. And here's a picture of the Logan County gang. And then here is a picture of the entrance to George Washington's home in Mount Vernon. The gardener either didn't know this or was in too big a hurry or simply couldn't see much in the dark space. He grabbed what he believed to be George Washington's skull, tucked it under his arm, and ran for home. The missing body part was discovered the next day, and everyone suspected the disgruntled gardener. He was immediately caught and must have been disappointed to learn he'd actually stolen the skull of one of Washington's in-laws. It was returned unharmed to its resting place. Then, just to make sure, Washington's nephew opened George's coffin and took a look inside. He was still in there. Relieved, the family began building a solid structure brick tomb for George and Martha. You can still visit this one today. 37 years later, in 1867, a lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, had a similar idea. His plan, according to two young men he tried to recruit for the job, was to break into the tomb of Abraham Lincoln and steal his coffin. Then he would stash the body somewhere in the South and wait for ransom offers, returning the body to the highest bidder. And ransom is like when you take something and then you say, oh, well, I'll give it back to you for $1 million or however much money you want. But no one agreed to help the lawyer. He abandoned the scheme and died a few years later. Only rumors of his plot remained. Did Big Jim Keneley know these stories? Was he inspired by them? There's no way to know. Certainly, he knew about the crime of body snatching, which was a serious problem in the 1860s and 70s. Medical colleges were always in need of bodies for use in human anatomy classes. Schools were willing to pay cash for bodies, no questions asked, and body snatchers filled the demand by digging up and delivering fresh corpses. Big Jim's plan was a bit more ambitious, and the payment he expected was a bit higher than the typical $15 paid by colleges. So colleges would pay someone $15 to bring them a body, whether, it didn't matter where it came from. So people were out here digging up bodies and selling them to a college. That's crazy. Following Keneley's detailed instructions, Logan County gang leader Thomas Sharp picked 4 other gang members. The five-man team traveled by wagon 30 miles north to Springfield, Illinois, Abraham Lincoln's former home, and the location of his tomb. The men rented a 2-story building downtown. They opened a saloon on the first floor and turned the second floor into a dance hall. This gave the team a perfect front for their operation. Gang member Robert Splain worked as a bartender, and the other members drifted in one at a time, just like regular customers. They could meet and talk at the bar without attracting any attention. For particularly secret sessions, they could duck into the back room. Keneley's orders were to break into Lincoln's tomb, snatch his body, and bury it in a ditch along the Sangamon River, a few miles north of town. The disappearance of Lincoln's remains would be front-page news all over the country, of course. The government would offer a huge reward for the return of the body. This is where Big Jim planned to make a personal appearance in the story. Only after the body was planted, Keneley was to travel from St. Louis to Springfield. While doing a little fishing in the Sangamon River, he just happened to stumble upon Lincoln's shallow grave. Sure, the police would find Keneley's chance discovery extremely suspicious, but Keneley would have a rock-solid alibi. He was in St. Louis on the night of the theft, with eyewitnesses to prove it. His innocence established, he'd offer to return the body, for the right price, naturally. To get back Lincoln's body, the government was going to have to let Ben Boyd out of jail. Big Jim's final touch was the date of the theft, the night of July 3rd. It was the night before Independence Day, and not just any Independence Day. July 4th, 1876 would be the country's 100th birthday, exactly 1 century from the day Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. By the night of July 3rd, the celebration in town would be well underway. No one would notice a few strangers lurking around Lincoln's tomb. And on July 4th, people in Springfield would be so busy with parades and fireworks that they wouldn't notice Lincoln was missing, giving Keneley's crew plenty of time to slip safely out of town. Thomas Sharp and the gang prepared carefully for the big night. One by one, on different days, each man took the 2-mile streetcar ride from downtown Springfield to Oak Ridge Cemetery. Each paid the 25-cent admission fee and walked up a muddy path toward the Lincoln Monument. Do you think they got away with it? I wonder. And y'all know I'm going to leave you hanging until tomorrow. So see you soon. Bye.